Hi, this is Ken Gidge, and this is The Art of Politics. It's the only show of its type. I'm a great Democrat, and over here is an okay Republican. Of course, my partner in crime. How are you? This is
I'm doing well,
Mr.
Ken.
O'Brien,
and right off, we have to start challenging you on the first 2 points you made. You know, the great Democrat and the lackluster Republican. You know,
I didn't say lackluster, but
no, I'm characterizing.
I'm glad you brought it.
But as you know, I tend to characterize things you say. So.
Yeah, well, you're not the only one.
I know.
Of late, I've been getting in a lot of trouble, and we've had an interesting week. But first, why don't we just talk a little bit about Boston? Because I lived in Boston. I lived on Com Ave at the corner of, I think it was Dartmouth Street, Exeter, right there. And as you know, the bombing, et cetera. And you were in Boston,
sure.
and you had a law practice in Boston. I mean,
sure. No, I went to law school, Suffolk University in Boston, and spent years practicing there. You know, trying cases in all the courts in the city, around the city, and so forth, and got to know Boston fairly well. And you know, it's just shocking, but for all of us across the country, but particularly for those of us who can, you know, think of times that we walked down Boylston Street and we went into some of those shops, and times that we would stand there watching the runners come in on a marathon day.
Absolutely.
And you know, I know I used to, and this is probably going to be hard for you to believe, I used to run the annual corporate challenge. Do you remember that? That have all the...
And where did you go? Around a circle? Or?
It was more of a challenge than that, actually.
Which was?
It was a 5-kilometer race. We would start off right near where Old Park Square used to be, between the Boston Garden and Boston Common, you know, the road there.
Okay, yeah.
And then we'd run all the way down to Kenmore Square.
That's 5 miles? No,
yeah,
turn around and come
5 kilometers.
All right, okay.
5 kilometers. And then coming back would be 5 kilometers. And so I can remember the same feeling we'd get on marathon day. We'd have hordes of runners around, and you know, all the families and everything. It was just a fun occasion. And for someone or group of people to go to a scene like that and to do what they did is just a degree of craziness and insanity that just I don't think most of us can begin to appreciate. And you know, and I'm still having difficulty listening to the reports of folks who are injured and folks who lost their family members without feeling very emotional.
Well, also 2 planes that went into the towers in New York came from Boston. This has taken place from Boston. I think I've had it because, you know, when we're from New Hampshire, so we're the Red Sox. We're the Patriots. We're the Bruins. I mean, that's just who we are. We're Boston in a sense. But I have, like you, I've been down there. I mean, I lived on 235 Com Ave, so I mean, to go right across to the Prue and right in that area meant nothing to me. I mean, I did it every day. But to see those, and by the way, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but they've sort of got 2 people. I'm not.
Well, I know the latest reports that are coming out around the time we're filming this is talking about 2 potential suspects or persons of interest, and certainly I think like anyone, we want to make sure we're very careful, we're cautious in how we describe suspects, and we're cautious, and we should be, and I hope the authorities will be, and I sense they certainly will be, very cautious before they charge someone and make sure that they are the right people.
This is kind of not what we do, but since we're sort of on the subject, let's get your opinion about it. As we know, all around the world, there are terrorists, and they have to have some sort of a plan. Is the plan to disrupt everybody and everything so much that when they reaches the pitch of craziness reaches a point, are they thinking that we're going to go to another belief or another religion without mentioning anything?
I think we have to be real careful even before we answer that question to understand what we're talking about. The word "they," it can stretch everyone from everyone like Timothy McVeigh or Eric Rudolph. Timothy McVeigh, who blew up the building in Oklahoma, and Eric Rudolph lit up the bomb in Atlanta at the Olympic Center there, or celebration, all the way up to, fully developed conspiracies such as Al Qaeda. I don't think that there's one theory there. There's one goal there. I think when you're dealing with a McVeigh or you're dealing with an
Well,
Eric
those are
Rudolph,
homegrown.
yeah, they're homegrown,
Yeah,
but they tend to be people striking out, sad people, mentally ill people, people with a warped sense of how to participate, how to push forward their political.
What's happening all around the world?
But
I mean,
I think there are some that get to themselves, some groups that get themselves to the point where they realize that even more important than the disruption and the maiming of people in one day is what they do to a society in the long term. When they make society afraid of terror and make society afraid of participating in public events or having to really compensate.
No, they make us scared.
Yeah, and look at the effect of all the hijackings and the bombings. Probably just from an economic perspective, even more than the immediate loss of planes and property, is the disruption of the society, as we have to now hire thousands of people to work for the Homeland Security and the Transportation Authority, and we have to go through the delays.
That is something that Bush had to put together.
I think, and no one disputes
hard
it.
and expensive.
Sure, and a society that has to have a military that's probably larger and more robust than any one of us would want, but we know we need it to protect ourselves. So they looked at all these things and they say, this is our goodness. We can blow up a bomb here and there once in a while and take a large society.
But the
and
Boston Marathon, one of the longest running marathons, I think this was 113 years yesterday, or Monday, excuse me.
117, yeah. 117th running.
All right, okay. And all 50 states and, I don't know, 60, 80 countries or something like that. So the eyes were not only on Boston, there was obviously on Boston, but what they did with 2 pressure cookers and very little, they say that those bombs are so small. I mean, I don't, killing people and tearing legs off and stuff, it doesn't sound small to me, but the way they're talking is it wasn't plastique. It could have been as much as matches.
Right.
I mean, give me a break.
Right. But they're having the effect, I would think, that the bombers want, which is it makes people afraid, scared, disruptive on society, maybe losing some confidence in their society, their country. I think that in the long term, that's what their goal is.
Yeah, but the interesting thing, you're right, and it does scare a lot of people, and there will be people scared all the time, no matter what, even if they have an army sitting next door to them. But this country, it's like the wrong country. I mean, we'll go to war to get bin Laden to a degree. I mean, we did go where he was. That was a wall we went to because of what took place.
Well, one of the things I read, Ken, was that Al Qaeda and the Taliban also were shocked at the American reaction. They knew that there would be an adverse reaction. They figured some cruise missiles would be thrown at them. They never expected an invasion of Afghanistan. And in point of fact, I guess Al Qaeda lost some position within the terrorist world and all because of the sharpness and the sustained nature of the American reaction to it.
Well, look, what we are. I mean, we're all foreigners, basically. I mean, I'm second generation, third generation from England. I'm English. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know how long your family's been in this country, but there's so many people. I mean, my son is in China, And so I asked, are there many Americans over here? He says, yeah, I see them, and Europeans, etc. But the majority are completely Chinese. And the
Right.
people you see over there are not people who go over there to live. They sometimes go over there to work or to teach, in my son's case. Over here, I mean, we're putting up fences to keep them out. Other countries are putting up fences to keep them in.
We are a nation of immigrants, certainly, you know, part of my family, the Irish part of the family, came over in the late 19th century. That would have been my grandparents. Part of my mother's family were here before the Revolution, and others came in the 19th century as well. But we were all immigrants, or our grandfathers, or great-grandfathers, and so forth were. But that introduces the question. I'd like to ask you this. What do you think of the bills that you hear and the proposals you hear coming out of Washington for changing the immigration law?
Well, it seems that the individual from Florida, is it Rubio is his name, I think, is it?
There's Senator Marco Rubio.
Yeah, okay, who is Spanish, obviously, and it seems that everyone is getting pretty happy with what they're coming up with, or it seems that way, and that would be to, I guess, give people a visa who are here, or the kids who are here. I'm not quite sure. Do you know more about it? Well, I'm sure you do know more about it.
My understanding of the proposal is, one, it's comprehensive, large, and no one other than this gang of 8 probably, is that the number of senators and their staff can be quite sure of what's in it. But it includes features such as, they say, requiring Department of Homeland Security to beef up the protection of the borders. As that starts, and the beginning of it, commencement of it is certified, then there would be an arrangement that would begin for the current illegal immigrants to identify themselves and to work their way towards, after 13 years, I think it is, resident visa status, and eventually work their way towards citizenship. In addition, there's other features such as worker visa, agricultural worker visas. And
Well, we need that.
Season.
There's just no question about that.
We used to have it in the past. It probably makes a lot of sense. And perhaps expanding the H-1 visas. The H-1 are the visas for people of highly educated people whose skills aren't available in the country to the degree they're needed.
And that's sad that we lost them after 9/11, when a lot of them were, let's say, back in their own countries on vacations, etc., or they are visiting to come back to school. They weren't let in.
Well, those are F visas, school visas.
Yes.
And certainly have to be concerned. Who's in the country? I mean, you had a group of, how many individuals were there? 16 individuals. One under arrest. 15 became hijackers, and some of them are here under student visas. So obviously we had to back off and say, who's in this country because they want to go to MIT, and who's in this country because they want to learn to take off with a jet, having never learned how to land it, and come to harm us. But going back to the bill, I really do resist a classification of individuals as being eligible for resident visa status and citizenship status, when the only thing of note that they have done that puts them into that category is that they've broken our immigration laws. I don't.
But I understand where you're coming from. But isn't there a point where you have, let's say, 12 million now? Isn't there a point where you just can't say go home? You just can't do that. So there has to be. I'm not sure if this is the middle way. There has to be another way. They're not leaving.
Look at
what are you going to do?
There's so many different answers to that, but one of the answers is that traditionally in American history, particularly as you got to the latter part of the 19th century into the 20th century, people would come for a short time and go back. It was not at all.
There's a lot of them who are staying.
a lot who
Yeah.
stayed, but a lot went back. People don't realize that. A lot of these immigrants who came, many of them returned, particularly as they got older, and it's not surprising anyone returned to
But are
it.
you
And so
saying,
I'm
yeah,
saying that you could require that people over time return to their country of origin. Again, it's not a matter of deportation. There's no roundup involved. If you tighten the immigration laws and the employment laws, people will go back to where they can get jobs, which is the countries in which they are citizens. I am
no,
no,
are you, I know,
let
are
me just
you
say this. It's very,
saying that you want the 11 million people to go back? Is that even
I want those
possible?
who are, I think, you asked a couple of questions. The answer to the first question is, I would rather that those who are in the country be here legally, and those who are not in the country legally be given the opportunity and the resources to go home. That's one. Two, I don't think that it should be a foundation for becoming a citizen that you manage to break our laws and get here. I think that's a bad thing, bad precedent. We already tried that during
Okay,
Reagan.
I know, but
we had what was it, 2 or 3 million?
But they didn't do what they were supposed to do also. They were
Yeah, what
supposed
makes
to
you-
make
what
the
makes you
borders
think-
stronger,
what makes you
put
think
up the fences, et cetera. They didn't do that. So, I understand your argument, and it's certainly.
What makes you think they're going to, Ken?
Well,
Let me. I want
that's
to.
part of the-
I want to
that's part of the
say something
agreement.
here. I've been trying to say for a few minutes because it's very important. These folks who have come here into our country legally are just like you and me. If I were living in South America, if I was living in Mexico, and conditions were harsh there, I would look to another country where conditions aren't harsh and try to get to that country for myself, for my family. It's understandable. I don't demonize them at all. In some cases, they're very courageous individuals who have exposed themselves to the personal danger and the marginal lives that they have here because they have to stay away from authority in many instances. And I understand they're victimized. From our perspective, though, as a country, the world's population grows by 88 million a year. We cannot accommodate that 88 million a year because life is better here and not so good where they are being born.
I got that.
And so 13 million of them have illegally entered our country. And I think it's perfectly permissible. It certainly is completely understandable. We'd say, you're not here legally. Now, we're not going to round you up and put you in concentration camps. We are going to say those jobs you came for, and they're not going to be here. And we'll assist you in getting back to where you should be, which is where you're citizen.
Okay, you say 13 million.
We don't know.
One
We
of
don't
the,
know.
one of the big
12,
things is
13.
there's obviously a lot of children that were born here, so you can add them, I suppose, to the group that's here in a sense illegally.
If they're born here under was it 19th century laws?
I
they're
know
American
that.
citizens.
I know that, but I think that they may be also the kids who are being counted. I mean, I could be wrong.
Who knows?
But
there's so many arguments over what the exact amount is. I mean, that's the characteristic of being illegal. They don't allow themselves to be counted.
Well,
perfectly understandable.
That's we could go on and on about that.
The other feature of this bill that really does concern me is that the way it is written and giving these folks who have come here illegally a pathway to citizenship, which sounds so innocuous, but basically saying, because you broke the law, we're going to reward you over those who haven't broken and are waiting in their countries of origin for visas to come through, and we're going to nonetheless put you ahead of the line for them. We also have to understand there's other features of U.S. immigration law, such as the siblings of American citizens get priority to enter the country. And so 13 million illegals translates into, and I've heard the figure, 35 million other individuals outside the U.S. who would have priority to come into the country. One of the features of our history of immigration is that immigration never became so overwhelming in numbers that that we couldn't assimilate. the new people coming in. You know, think about the Irish immigrants. My background is Irish, Scottish. And the Irish immigrants came to the U.S., and they were not people who were used to participating in a democracy, because they were basically under the control of a colonial power, the British Empire, up until the World War I, 1920s almost. But they came here in such numbers that they were shown and taught how to participate in the American representative democracy.
Speak English.
Well, that was part of the ease of the transition, but they also had, were able, you could take people who didn't have a culture of democracy, a relationship to the government that is so important to us as Americans.
And it didn't take them long to run Boston.
It didn't take them long, because they didn't come in numbers that were overwhelming.
Well, there's a lot of illegal of everyone, including the Irish.
But there was always this idea that they had to assimilate. One of the problems we're having in the illegal immigrant groups is there isn't the same effort to assimilate, and that's going to be bad in the long run for our country. My grandmother's.
I'm letting you get along with a lot of stories.
Yeah, my grandmother's childhood language was Gaelic. She grew up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she grew up not speaking English. She spoke.
Have you heard it?
Never heard her speak it. That's what I'm going to tell you the story.
Oh, okay.
And my dad used to tell me. My dad grew up in mid 1930s, late 1930s, and he said he could remember when he would come home from school and come into the house. And as he'd come in, he'd hear his mother speaking with one of her buddies. She'd be speaking Gaelic. And immediately when they realized there was a child present, they would switch to English, because they were Americans now. And they wanted their children to grow up speaking English.
I've had that happen, especially the old French. I've had that happen.
Sure, sure.
Other languages.
And it's real important.
Because you're in America.
It's really important to keep the societal consensus being that we speak English here, that we have a representative democracy, that we are citizens of a country, not the subject of the country, that it's no longer, what we find, unfortunately, in South America, Central America, countries where people are generally alienated from their government and don't think they have the right to affect the government and to throw out reps.
And they're shocked to come here and have a crime committed against them and find out that the perpetrator is in a lot of trouble.
Yes, yeah, because they're someone significant. They're not some peasant. They're not some worker who no one cares about. They're a citizen. They're a person. They have a right. And so it takes. You have to make sure that you don't get so many people coming and being present at once that understanding is lost.
But they're already here. There's many groups. It's not just Spanish either. I think you made a point. People come from all sorts of countries. I mean, there's a lot of people. But let's see if I've got this straight. What you're saying is somehow we help them all to get back, and we put them in line to come back.
Certainly, they should be allowed to apply for visas once they get back.
Well, from what I've heard about it is that they pay a fine, a large fine. They get in the back of the line to a degree. 13 years is a long time. All right. Big penalties if you bring anyone else over illegally. So it doesn't look like in fact, it looks like it's so strict and all the things they have to do to jump through the hoop. It almost would be better to go back and to apply, a visa to come over here.
Except you don't have to.
And maybe
you don't have to join the line. You're here, you get to stay, and then we come up with this fiction. Oh, but we'll give you a resident visa after 13 years. Well, but you can stay anyway. What's the difference? And then once you get that resident visa, you can get, as any person with a green card, a resident visa is synonymous with green card. You can just apply and become a citizen. That's not appropriate. It really isn't.
The Republicans have
I refuse to listen to this as a political party issue.
Really?
This is an American issue.
Oh,
It
well,
really is.
I happen to agree with you on that,
This
but
is an issue where we have a right to control our borders.
but the individuals, many individuals has taken this to be political and has thrown it onto the Republican Party. You know that.
Oh,
I mean, that's one of the reasons why. I mean, Obama gets what, 85, 89, 90% of the Spanish vote, and the...
Are you telling me because President Obama is viewed as someone that favors the immediate legalization of illegal aliens, he gets the Hispanic vote? That's your thesis?
Well, you know, you don't want to use it, as you said, you don't want to use this as a political thing because, in a sense, in your opinion, it's not. But it is. It's a big political thing.
First of all, I would disagree, and we can get into the
okay, all right.
We can get into the why and wherefore that somehow or another the Hispanic vote tends to vote Democrat because of the issue of immigration and the traditional Republican opposition to illegal immigration. And I'll just give you one fact, and we can move on because we could sit
I know,
here.
we could go on forever
The one fact is there was no one in the Republican Party that was more amenable to amnesty for illegal aliens than John McCain. He was from a border state. He had a lot of Hispanic constituents. He took the position that was at variance with most of us in the Republican Party that there ought to be amnesty, and he got what, 5% more of the Hispanic vote, 10% more than Mitt Romney. That's not the reason that the Hispanic vote tends to go towards the Democrat Party. There's other reasons that have to do more with identity, economic identity, and that sort of thing. So I don't think it'll make any difference. I think the problem with Senator Rubio in his analysis of this is that somehow or another he's convinced, and he's a very good man, a very thoughtful senator, but he's somehow convinced himself, and he's convincing others that this would be a way for Republicans to move towards a better opportunity to get the Hispanic vote.
And you don't think that's pandering?
I think what is going to get us the vote is what traditionally gets us the vote is when we start talking like traditional Americans and we start talking about
but
liberty.
America is not traditional anymore, like you and I, let's say, grew up into it.
It could be that that's an issue. You know, I know that there's some thesis around. I'm not sure if I'd mentioned this to you, and I don't want to ramble on too much here, but there was a law professor from Notre Dame who wrote a few weeks after the election, and that was her thesis. And I know there was a rabbi who just published something a week or two ago, and I think it was the Jerusalem Post, is that their main paper in Israel, and he had the same thesis, which is the reason that Mitt Romney didn't win is because, let me say something that's going to sound stupid, and then if you start thinking about it, you can realize that there's greater issue than comes up immediately. He didn't get enough votes. He didn't win because he didn't get enough votes. And the reason he didn't get enough votes is there wasn't enough votes for him to get. That would be a concern of the Republican Party. It's not going to be alleviated by pandering to Hispanics.
I really don't know what you just said.
He didn't get enough votes.
Well, we know that.
Yeah, but think why he didn't.
Because there weren't enough votes for him to get.
Yeah, because
why?
And it well could be because if we have a electorate that is oriented towards government and what they can do for them, then it could be that you've lost the consensus that we had in the past.
You mean like the opposite? Don't ask what your government can do for you,
yeah,
but what you can do for your
it
government.
used to be, John Kennedy, I think, really expressed what was a majority sentiment in 1960.
So you think that that's changed?
And that's a concern.
I hope you don't think it's the 47%.
No, I'm not. Don't put words in my mouth. I'm not saying this. I'm saying that there is an analysis out there that concerns some of us that it might have been lost.
Guns. Let's move on to guns. What happened in the Senate? The Republicans do not want a background checks? Explain this
There
to
are
me.
background checks.
What do you mean? There's no background checks.
Yeah,
They voted this down. In other words,
No, Ken, there's background checks.
no, I don't think so.
Oh,
Well, there are background
see,
checks.
you haven't bought a
they-
handgun, have you?
Well, yes, there are background checks, but they don't want to expand it to gun shows.
What we should be trying to do is to figure out, one, what the problem is, and two, what the solution is. We shouldn't be demagoguing this the way that Vice President Biden and President Obama and that Senator Manchin, I think his name is, from Connecticut,
Geez, those
and,
are all Democrats.
and Gabby Gifford and all these people.
She got shot in the head.
All these people are trying to demagogue it, and all their appeals
what
are to
demagogue
motion.
what?
The issue
background
of
checks?
gun control. What we want to try to figure out is, why are there these alienated young men who are mentally ill that are going into places and shooting them up? What can you do about it? I think one of the things you can do about it is to make sure that you don't have gun-free zones. There's no more dangerous place, potentially dangerous place in the world than Israel. Do you ever hear of anyone going into a school in Israel and shooting it up?
Yeah.
When?
I think they blow up buses.
No, that's it. Did you ever hear of anyone going into a school in Israel and shooting it up?
I don't think so. Now
You want to know why? You know I know why?
Yeah, everyone's got a gun.
The teachers are all armed. It's sort of like coming into the New Hampshire State House and going into the gallery and saying, even with the magnificent change of rules of the latest administration, saying I'm going to shoot it up. Well, that doesn't make much sense. Not if you want to have.
No, but let's get back. The Republicans do not want to expand background checks for people who purchase guns at a gun show.
What we want to do is to figure out what the issue is. Is the issue a lack of enforcement? Because we have background checks.
No, but not in gun shows. They want to expand this to gun shows.
And why do you want to do it?
Checks.
Look at all the
I don't know, people getting shot, buying guns.
How many of those guns came through gun shows?
I don't know. Does anyone? Does anyone know?
Yes, we do. The young fellow in Newtown, his mother purchased a gun, and they went through background checks.
No. And the kid knew how to shoot.
No. This is just demagoguing. We see this happen. We were legislators. We see this happen all the time.
How about clips? 35 clips for a pistol?
We see this happen all the time.
Well, I mean, do you really think that should be 35 clips to one pistol?
I don't see any reason that it shouldn't be.
Well, 154 shots, this crazy guy who, I
think it's, perhaps we should license.
154 shots in less than 5 minutes?
Yeah, should we start licensing pressure cookers now? Should we start
licensing?
Should we start licensing knives now?
Yeah. I think if people start bombing with pressure cookers, yeah, I think we should.
Oh no! Oh no, Ken. Right.
Your son brought a pressure cooker to school. Out.
I know,
but that's silly. Now that's silly.
We do this all the time as legislators. We try to figure out what is the problem and how do we solve it. We just don't start running around as if our heads were cut off trying to figure, we got to do something, got to do something, got to do something. Actually, some of us do, but
I know us Democrats do, and the Republicans.
That might have been the case. I'm sorry to embarrass you.
That's all right. I'll get you. We got 21 minutes here. Don't worry.
No, I mean, the legislation that was being proposed fell of its own weight because it was a solution looking for a problem, and no one's looking for the solution for the problem that we know exists, which are that people are going into gun-free zones, mentally ill people, and causing deaths.
Well, they were a gun-free zone. You got to remember what we're talking about. I guess is Newtown. This guy had let's get something straight on this. You're right. They had all the checks. They had everything. Everything was legal. Mm-hmm. This guy, for some reason, chose that school. I guess his mother at one time either taught there part-time or did something.
Did he go to school there? I think he might have. I mean, you look at the picture of the guy and what little I've read about him. It's a sad case of a young fellow being bullied and slowly winding up being mentally ill.
But the door was locked. And if you want to get into a school and you have a, AK-7, you can literally, honestly, you can shoot a door, and that's what he did to get in.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not almost a good thing to use as an example because everything was done properly.
No, it wasn't. You have a young, mentally ill man who's committing suicide by mass murder. And he's going to go to a place that he can commit mass murder to do it. And certainly you can take your foot, you can take a hatchet, you can take the car and drive it through the door, as happened in the post office in Mount Vernon recently, where some lady didn't stop in time, went right through the front door. It's easy enough to get into a structure if you want to, and if you have a weapon, to hurt people. Whether it's a gun or a bomb or a rifle. And you have to ask yourself, what could prevent that happening? One of the things that we know to a certainty cuts down on the incidence of that is if it's not a gun-free zone. If in fact you go into one classroom and start shooting it up, and the teacher in the classroom next door comes and confronts you.
That sounds really good now. Okay, and you can even say that problem can be solved. I don't think so. I think this is always going to happen. But let's face it, when it comes to the mentally ill, it has been the Republicans that have cut monies or not let monies come through, even here in the state of New Hampshire, where mentally ill and hospitals have been closed. It's so awful now. I think it was $2 or $3 million to get 12 beds up in Concord. That's a ridiculous amount of money to do that. Why are we not spending more money on that? We don't have it? We don't think it's worth doing?
You're asking me to adopt the premise of your question that somehow or another that this is a Republican-generated issue, and then answer the question. I reject the premise. I don't think it is. I think it's over time, starting with actually suits brought by the various state chapters of the American Civil Liberties Union. There were lawsuits to get people who were inmates, patients at mental institutions free. And the theory was that we can allow these people to be out in the community because chemical therapies will allow them to function, and over time we've found that that's not the case, and yet we can't reverse it because it's so expensive to reverse it.
Well, the interesting thing that you just said is something I wanted to get to before, but you were quite tricky in how you got out of this, is that young man in Newtown, Connecticut, has one of the hardest for parents to get their children committed. It's one of the most difficult places in the United States. In other words, parents will go to the police and say, look, my son is out of control. What can we do? They say nothing. Has to commit a crime before they can do anything. And then what do? No beds, they put him in jail.
And so I can't give you the Connecticut experience with that issue. I can give you the New Hampshire experience.
Okay.
Because I was on Judiciary Committee, and that's where the bills were sent that would deal with involuntary hospitalizations of individuals because of mental illness or alleged
and what are the
mental
rules?
Illness. And I'll tell you one of the societal rules is that if you bring any bill in that would allow caring parents or caring doctors or police officers to identify a person who is a danger to themselves or to others, that the one group would always show up to oppose any expansion of those laws would be the New Hampshire chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union. Inevitably, Claire Ebo, who is their chief lobbyist, would come in and oppose anything. And she's a good, I know Claire, and you probably know her as well. She's just retiring. She's a good lady, but
Well,
the
we're all glad she's retiring.
but there was
And
almost
I mean that nicely.
yeah, there's an ideological knee jerk to that. My heart would go out. We've gone through Concord, and we've been in
So
Manchester, and you
what
see the people who are suffering there.
do
and
you know the
realize,
rules to, if I, God forbid, my son comes home and he's not in control? I mean, is it myself, my wife, a doctor? Do you know how it works up here in New Hampshire? I mean,
It
should we get
involves
more
a
rules?
lot of procedure and procedures. It involves getting people, medical people involved. It involves getting the courts.
Do you think that
and-
this ought to
and
be the way we ought to go? Maybe we
I-
should get a
I-
law
I-
coming
think,
in?
I think that parents and caring people, we ought to have greater common sense in society, and we ought to realize that we're not going to be putting people in mental institutions as if it's Soviet Russia.
No,
And
no,
we've-
no, no, no,
and-
no,
and-
no,
but
no,
people,
that's never
peop-
gonna happen.
People need to be taken care of.
Correct.
You know, this young fellow down in Newtown, you know, from all we've read, needed care.
His mother,
And she couldn't get it. These are super.
Exactly.
These are really affluent people. I'm not sure if you followed anything
Yes,
about it.
yes.
You know, they had the money to take care of that child. It wasn't a resource issue. Connecticut is one of the most generous states when it comes.
But being 18 years old, now considered an adult, you can't really commit an adult.
And it's the fault of all of us over the last 40, 50 years. Let me give you.
So how do we take care of it now?
By starting to reverse
Here
some
in
of
the
those-
state?
by
You want to
starting
start in the state of New
Well,
Hampshire?
it has to be done both federally and state.
Where do we start first?
We start where we have you and I have the opportunity to get it done, which is what I tried to do when I was on judiciary, which is to make caring relatives have a greater opportunity to identify someone as being a relative as being in crisis, and get care for the person, and then obviously get.
Well, I'm for that, because we're talking to get guns out of the picture. I'm one of the only Democrats that voted with the Republicans on the guns, simply because I know Republicans and Democrats alike carry guns in the state house. So that's just one of the reasons why. But we all know that it's mentally ill people. So how difficult is it for, we'll use parents first, how difficult is it for law enforcement people, instead of having them put in jail, to have someone at least committed for 10 days?
The problem, Ken, is there's now a labyrinth of laws, both state and federally, that prevent us from applying common sense. Let me give you an example. I was listening to an interview with the president of Hillsdale College out in Michigan. Hillsdale College doesn't take any federal funds, and the reason they don't take federal funds is they don't want to adhere to all the federal laws on how to deal with students and everything. And this fellow was saying, you know, I came to Hillsdale about 5 years ago. One of the reasons I came here is he'd been in another school. It's like University of Chicago or something. And he said, there was a young fellow who freshman year who obviously went into a mental episode, stopped coming to class. You know, it was a seminar. He was a smart guy. I knew him, even as a freshman, almost immediately. I followed up, went to his dorm room, talked to his roommate, and he said he's drinking all the time. He's, you know.
So what happened?
And he said, as a professor, I went to the dean of students and,
Okay.
you know, what are we going to do? And they said, there's nothing we can do. Well, can't we call the parents? Oh, no. There's a federal law that prevents, if you take any federal funds, any of the student records of college students are private. They cannot be released without the student saying. Even if parents are paying for the tuition, they can't be. And he said,
Well, that is true, and I know that to be factual.
yeah, and you know,
Yeah.
by the way, you
That's-
want to know where that law came from? It was William F. Buckley's brother. James Buckley was in the U.S. Senate. He was
Really?
yeah, he was from New York, and he's a U.S. senator from New York. And funny story. When they were growing up, William F. and James, William F. was the much better student. He was the joy of his father, and the grades would come home and it'd be great, and you know the whole family's proud of William F. James, not so much. And so, so the grades would come home, and he'd get just a rash from his old man. And so when he got to be a U.S. senator, he put a rider on one of the student financing bills, got an amendment to it that the Senate went along with, and it started this process of, if you take any federal funds, these scholarships, student records are entirely private to them, should not be released without the student's permission. That's not commonsensical, because as this president of Hillsdale College was talking about, he said, you know, now at Hillsdale, if we see a young 18-year-old man suffering that kind of a breakdown, we can call up the parents right away. We can say, you know, Bill your son Bill's having trouble. You know, come on up here, and that's just the decent thing to do. We've lost.
So what do
our
we do
common
here in
sense.
New Hampshire? I mean, you know, I mean, look, if we take guns out of the equation, and I take it you wish to, I understand that, and obviously to a degree I do too, and it is mental illness. How do we make it up here in New Hampshire that will make it one way or another easier either for the parents, because I've heard parents begging, please do something for my son, and they're saying there's nothing that we can do legally, and the police say we can't do anything until he or she commits a crime. What can we do up here?
We need to make budgeting choices to make sure resources are available, and you can't go from, you know, lousy to perfection in one budget cycle.
No, but what can we do to have parents or
you give parents,
guardians?
You start putting in place laws that recognize that even though a child of a man or a woman might be 25 or 30 years old, they still care about them, and they should be able to bring to bear resources.
We both have another one more year, and I don't see why either you, I, or together, or different people put something together. Of course, would be a lot of research federally. What can we do?
Sure.
If we can't do what's taking place in other states? How can we make it easier?
Certainly we are too. I mean, I've become a little bit jaded on this because I worked hard in judiciary to allow resources, state resources, to be available, and to be available just both in terms of spending, but also available in terms of parental or relative interest to help out somebody.
Well, let's do something.
It's a reasonable. It's a reasonable response, because
right,
I don't think anyone would disagree that with one, these things are going to occur in the future. You could have all kinds of different rules and laws in effect, trying your best to take guns away from people, and there'd be so many bad things that come from that. But assuming that you're going to cut down on the number of incidents of mentally ill people going into and killing defenseless children and others, you're still going to have that happen.
Well, I'll tell you
but one of the things you can do is I think reduce the likelihood of it by having resources available to help people out. You know, when they're suffering a breakdown.
No, I think I got you with the resources. I think what I'm seeing, and I think you probably brought it up, is legalities. Yes, we do need resources, but the question is, we don't have the resources, but we have to throw a net over this person, because he or she is going to do something awful.
Right.
So do we throw the net over them without the resources, or do we just take this person and we just say, sorry, there's nothing we can do for you? What can we do as two state legislators to change it, to help? Now, I understand money, but is there something that we can do?
Sure.
Mentally ill people.
Sure, we can liberalize the involuntary hospitalization laws. We can make it easier to involuntarily hospitalize someone, but we're going to run into problems with that. We run into problems with the privacy people,
I don't care.
With some of the
I don't care.
Folks who think, you know, individual liberty trumps everything.
I know.
I
would like to have my last year known as an individual who at least attempted to do something on the subject.
Right.
And I think it's probably a good cause.
Oh, I think it is. I think it is. Let's spend some time talking about it, because I think those
maybe we can bring somebody on.
Yeah, those folks such as myself who truly believe that our Second Amendment rights are fundamental to setting the right relationship between individuals and their government, and I really do think this is the case.
The Second Amendment rights, and I'm not arguing with you about it, obviously I'm not, but there are particular times where it would be nice for everyone to have a background check. Gun shows, and you said it last week, they can do this in 15 minutes with the computers that they've got.
You have to ask yourself why you're doing a background check. You're trying to find out if someone's a felon or if they're mentally ill.
Correct.
And so we can find that out now. These folks, there's sufficient background.
We
so
know that, but
we ought to be one enforcing the laws we have.
You agree that on gun shows they should have background checks?
I don't think that's a problem. I don't see that that's a problem. No one is saying, but for gun shows, we would have a society.
Well, that's just
no
one
demonstration
part.
of it. The argument that we ought to do it is almost a religious argument on the part of the left. It's taken on faith.
Part of the left?
On those who are coming from the left spectrum of the.
Am I on the left?
I would think so. I would think so.
I'm on the left?
Sure. For those who
Actually, I'm on your right.
Yeah. for those who argue for background checks, there's no evidence that it helps out in anything. It's just sort of let's do it. Let's do it because we have faith that it'll do something.
Statistically, when background checks came, they do reject people from buying guns. Do you know the statistics of rejections?
I know one.
Do they?
I know one statistic that is very meaningful to me. That after the ban on semi-automatic weapons was taken off, that the number of gun-related deaths went down.
Oh, that's a
so you know if we're looking for statistics.
No, with statistics, statistically we know that a lot of people don't get guns because of either they have a prior felony or not to be too stable or domestic disputes and all sorts of things like that. We already know that. People do go to gun shows, buy guns, and basically sell them, obviously. And a lot of people, and you're talking about guns. I know a person who has a safe. When he built his house, he had a safe put into the foundation, so you can't get the damn thing out. It's a big safe, and he has a lot of guns. So you're never going to get into his. But look at the stealing of guns. Should we put some sort of a bill that they have to have gun locks, or what do we do? We've got to do something.
There ought to be a law. There ought to be a law. Why? We just don't run around as legislators or members of Congress saying, oh, there ought to be a law. We're trying to solve a problem. And one of the things that really does strike me as being a hallmark of the gun control advocates is that they just keep on coming up with different ways to limit the ownership of a gun without trying to either being able to demonstrate or even being able to articulate what it's supposed to be achieving.
Listen, the best thing that ever happened to the gun factories and people was the election of Barack Obama. Within the 4 or 5 years since he has been the president, they have sold more guns at higher prices to more people because everyone is afraid. The NRA is scaring everyone that we're going to take the Second Amendments away.
Well, he's not pleasing me because I can't go out target practicing. It's hard to get ammunition.
Oh.
And it's expensive. 9mm handguns, ammunition for handguns has doubled in price over the last year or two.
Well, of course. That's right. If we're in the wrong business, we don't want to sell the guns, let's sell the ammo.
Yeah, well, it could be. Actually, either side of the business would be okay. It's just, again, I resist this knee-jerk reaction, which is let's control guns more, when there's no demonstration that it does anything of value. Let's have more background checks. Let's restrict...
Background checks stop crazy people from getting guns. Okay? So are you trying to tell me or saying to me that people who go to gun shows, some of them are not mentally ill and shouldn't really have a gun?
I'm trying to find out what you're trying to achieve that can be demonstrated
Keep guns out of crazy people's hands.
And that's not the problem. The problem is...
The problem is not keeping guns out of crazy people's hands?
No, the problem is that we're not properly treating people who are distressed or crazy.
I think we just went hopefully you and I will talk more about that, maybe even have somebody on what we can do in the state of New Hampshire to try to, because this is a problem.
I agree. It's a problem nationally.
And that money is also a problem.
I agree. Nationally, it's a problem, but let us not turn immediately to controlling guns or to limiting our important civil rights, whether in the Second Amendment, First Amendment, or any other of the Bill of Rights, just because in faith we believe it will have a good effect.
But you guys keep saying this, and it's not being done. No one is trying to limit the rights. No one has taken the Second Amendment away. We can't even get a bill to stop a clip fitting into just a pistol that can shoot 35.
You just, again, premised your statement, your observation, on two somewhat inconsistent declarations. One is that no one's trying to take a Second Amendment away. No one's trying to limit the rights. Probably no one's trying to revoke the Second Amendment. You're absolutely right. Yes. Time and again in Washington, on the part of the president and Joe Biden and those who ally with him, they are doing their best to limit our Second Amendment rights.
Well, that's not...
And in ways that isn't necessary. It's not constitutional, I would submit. It's not good for the overall and long-term health of our democracy. And it's not necessary. I mean, as legislators, you sit there going, it's not necessary.
This is another hour that we've gone through. We got about 3 minutes. What's going at the State House for you this coming week? We've had a time off.
Well, there's one bill I wanted to ask you about, and it's a bill that would emancipate some slaves from the pre-Civil War in New Hampshire who are
and you're against
apparently. I don't. Well, again, I wanted to find out your perspective on it because I'm concerned that someone would assume I have the right to tell a person they're free or not free.
Well,
because
actually,
if you can say to someone you're free, that means you have a right to say they're not free. How can I usurp that authority over any individual's life?
I think that what you just said is kind of funny. We cannot say you're free. We probably can say we're sorry for our...
Well, that's not what it says. I mean,
we're sorry for what our forefathers have done or whatever. That's about all we can do.
Well, I mean, you know, for the most part, my forefathers were hiding behind hedges when these people were petitioning the New Hampshire legislature.
Oh, God.
And before the Civil War. But putting that aside, the point I'm making is if you can tell somebody by legislation you're free, then that means you should be able to tell someone by legislation you're not free.
Well,
I don't have that right. You don't have that right.
Well, this is a whole other show, but we've got to say goodbye. So give people your address where they get in touch with you, and you have
Sure.
do you have a website?
No, not yet. I'm coming up.
Coming up to a website, and also you're on Facebook.
Yeah. And so the Gmail address is williamlobrien@gmail. That's where you can reach my email. Telephone number is 620-8710.
Okay, we have some people. I'm not sure if we mentioned it. Londonderry, Claremont is now listening.
Amherst.
Amherst is listening. Also, Goffstown is tuning in. So we want to thank you because this is fun. And one of the reasons why is obviously this gentleman right here, who happens to be a Republican, and me, who's I think this type of talk and shows are very, very important. My name is Ken Gidge. I can be gotten at kgidge@aol.com. I am on a website called Gidge World, which is an art website. And I guess that's about it. So good night. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you.